Welcome, welcome, welcome. Hi, everyone. My name is Akash. I'm the CEO of Airtime, your AI researcher to find patterns and insights just by asking a few questions. Today, I'll be talking to Chris about the 5 lessons you wish you had learned earlier as a product person, or as I like to put it, the 5 deadly sins. Maybe you correct me, Chris, on this later on, not to be so brutal about that. Um, if you're active on LinkedIn, there's a chance you may have come across Chris. He's doing the walks and talks from Nashville, Tennessee, right? That's where you're tuning in from, where he shares his wisdom in short video segments. Chris is, by the way, a founder, product and corporate strategist, and he has over 30 years of experience working with product teams at both strategic and operational levels. Now, just to make sure that you can hear us and see us well, please let us know where you're tuning in from and maybe what you're interested to hear today. If you have any questions during our discussion with Chris, like in the first 30 minutes of this webinar, I'll be having a lively dialogue with Chris. If you have any questions, you don't need to wait until the Q&A in the end. You can throw them in the comments section. If you'd like to do my second point, if you'd like to do a background check on either of us or come back to us with questions after the show, I'm going to put our LinkedIn links and profiles in the comments as well. So feel free to connect with us and continue the discussion. My last point is, for all of you who tune in live, I'd like to give you a little something from an Airtime CEO perspective and seat. And I'm going to put a secret promo code also in the comments section, which you can use to get 25% off from Airtime for 3 months. Now, I went through my regular introduction. Chris, it's my honor and pleasure to welcome you in my webinar series. And let's kick things off by saying a few words about yourself.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. So just a real brief background. As Akash said, I've been leading product teams for the last 30 plus years. I've always been a product guy, all the way back to studying industrial design at Ohio State. Once I got out of school, was staff designer, worked my way up into a leadership role in my late 20s with a pretty big outdoor power equipment company. And that's where I was on the product side, so product development. And it was the first time I actually started to work with product managers. I didn't even know that was a thing early in my career. As most of us early in our career, we don't even know what we don't even know. And that was one of them. And so really started to enjoy my work with the product management team. Had some great mentors there, and then moved into more leadership roles. And then finally, in the last 15 years or so, in executive roles, leading all products. So that's product management, product development, industrial design, quality, those types of roles, as well as usually those executive roles also had overseas teams. So I had teams in Asia and elsewhere. And then worked for a couple of large companies, and then got a call out of the blue one day from a good friend who was a CEO at a company I was with previously, but he was a partner at a private equity firm. And they had just bought a company, and the company had a great technology base, but they didn't quite know what to do with it. And so asked me to come on as a consultant. And that started my consulting track. And did that, was working with their exec team on corporate strategy, working with the product team, specifically product managers on product portfolio, technology, how to be great product managers and build those out. And then just recently, in the last few years, been working with other clients, call it mid-market. So this may be up to $1 billion, $1.5 billion revenue companies on corporate and product strategies and integrating those two. So work closely, obviously, with entire product teams, including product managers. And I also do mentoring work at Vanderbilt's the Wondery, which has part of their program as an incubator. So I'm working with startups. So it's kind of nice bookends as well, building out product strategies, how to do good customer discovery, and the things that I think we're going to talk about here today.
Absolutely. And there's one thing I'd like to highlight straight away. I really love in your experience that you have this perspective of on the corporate strategy level as well as the product and operational level, because you can, I'm very hopeful of that, help us to make that connection, how product ties into the larger strategy of companies, and how it can do a better job achieving those strategic goals. Let's kick things off and just jump in the deep water right away. The title of our session is the 5 lessons you wish you had learned earlier as a product manager. I Based on your experience, and you've seen a lot, international settings, various sizes of companies, what do you think are the five most like grave errors or mistakes that a product manager, a product person could do?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I'll step back. So I define product, just me personally, as a hard good, could be software, could be a service. So I think that those are like product solutions, right? It's kind of lumping them together. And it's interesting because it doesn't matter the segment. It doesn't matter if it's commercial, B2B, consumer based. I found that product managers, as they go through their progression, their career, tend to stumble over these 5 things. And as you learn, I was blessed to have great mentors. So even though I stumbled on some of them were pointed out ahead of time. So I didn't make that mistake. And so it was a good watch for as I led product manager teams.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot, obviously, but these are the 5 that I constantly seen that I think would be a great discussion today.
Oh, cool. Let's dive into them. Can you walk us? Let's just
Yeah.
start with that, and then we deep dive into each one of them. Okay, just to give the audience some crumbs ahead, because I deliberately withheld in the past disclosing the 5 topics
Perfect.
for you. So let's have an overview.
Yeah, in no particular order. Probably the biggest one is designing a product solution for yourself. Even if you're the user, designing it for yourself. The next one is not knowing the competition or not knowing the competition well enough. And that could include potential newcomers, right? Startups that are going to be disruptors. This is one I see a lot from younger product managers, is not really understanding how their product category or their product solution supports the bigger corporate strategy. So that was that link that you talked about earlier between product and corporate. There has to be that link there. And so not understanding it clearly, and sometimes there's a mismatch that we can go through a little bit. Not really understanding their numbers. So I had a mentor early in my career, and he'd always say that a product manager is a mini CEO. And so as a mini CEO, you really need to know your numbers. And those are financials. Those are maybe consumer facings, like a net promoter score, those types of things. And then the last one I see, this is especially true in the software space, where you have engineers coming in to be a product manager. So they have a heavy technical background. And the product manager's role is to tell what they want to get done and why, but not necessarily how, right? The how part of it is the product development team's expertise. It's their job, and it's why you hired them. So let them shine. And what I find is, especially sitting in on roadmap reviews or technical reviews, is a product manager that came from a technical background will step in and default back to their engineering self and try to tell the team how to do it. And so those are kind of the 5 that I've seen over and over that product managers can stumble over, that you should be aware of up front.
Absolutely. And from what I hear, it's not necessarily being new to the role, right? So also product managers who've been around for a number of years can easily find themselves building a product for themselves, right?
That's right.
And
That's right.
what I'd love to understand, let's go back to that first point about building a product for yourself, right? So it's we're in 2024 now. I think in the last 20 years, there's been a lot of literature around customer centricity, how you need to understand your target customers. And I also observe also myself falling into this trap of building something that, oh, I have this problem. I'm using airtime also for my discovery processes, and I just ask for things that would be amazing for me from the tech team. My question to you is, we don't necessarily notice when we do this. A lot of times we notice it too late. Are there any checks that we can do on ourselves to understand if we're really building a product for our target customer, or are we building it for ourselves?
Yeah. So, I step all the way back, and
Yeah.
it's certainly good to say, hey, I'm a user. I can be a data point N of one. But if you step all the way back and you kind of remove yourself from that role, going into it almost as like a child's mind, right? Almost as a new person to this maybe industry or category, and you start to ask fundamental questions again. Go out, talk to actual users, talk to super users, talk to people that chose your competition and ask them why. There's a whole host of very well documented and supported ways. Ethnographies is a great way. You can go into people's workplace or home and observe and ask lots of why questions. You'll see a lot of workarounds. You'll see a lot of things that consumers will do that they don't even realize they're doing that could be opportunities. That's kind of front end work. As you march through the development process with your teams, I like to go back to the consumers and say, hey, we did this early work. We thought we heard this. Here's some insights we peeled away. Here's maybe some concepts or solutions. Is this something that resonates with you? Is this something that we heard correctly? And then bring them along the journey as you refine all the way up to product launch to say, did we get this right? It's so important to constantly go back to the consumer and verify your hypothesis. And that gets you out of the designing it for yourself. Now, it's good. You'll have a point of view, of course, but it's important to continually go back to the actual user.
Okay, so if I follow the product discovery process where I explore the problems of the customer, I bring them concepts, right, the solution ideas back to them. That is, so to say, a check on myself that I'm not prioritizing something for myself, and I'm not building something for internal needs.
Right. Yeah, and it's through that process that you're almost guaranteed to uncover something that you didn't even think of. Right. That was an issue. It was a workaround. It was something that you watched a consumer do, and it could be hardware, it could be software, it could be anything else that then became an opportunity for you to go back. Hey, that's something our competition isn't solving. It looks like it's a pain point to the consumer. And then to put together a little product thesis to then go back to them and say, hey, we saw this, we heard this, is this truly something that sounds like something that could help you solve whatever you're trying to solve?
And if you, I'm sure you like, what I'd be interested in is, so what you say makes a lot of sense. In my experience, what also happens quite frequently is that we say, oh, I know this. I've done my discovery. I worked in this industry. I know what the customer wants and how it works. So I'm just gonna cut to the chase and build that thing. And now when I say it, it's sort of conscious. But I think when you're making decisions on the product, you don't necessarily realize that you have this sort of attitude that, okay, we can jump over this, and I don't need to validate that. What's your experience in such a situations? How can either the team or the person be conscious of this bias?
Yeah, great point. And what I like, you don't have to have a fully blown out stage gate or phase gate process, but even a skeleton, even the concept behind kind of a gating process helps, because in each phase you get to define, hey, we need to go out and do this, right? Customer discovery, prototyping, tooling, go-to-market, whatever those are appropriate for the phase. And if ahead of time you go into it and saying, hey, during this first phase, we're going to do customer discovery, we're going to do prototyping, validation, then those become action items that the team agrees on that, hey, we're going to go do this. So it's a forcing function to go through that. The other approach that you can do on top of that is create something like a consumer insight panel, which is a group of users that you've identified as your core cohort, right? Your target market that you bring along for the ride, right? So I did this with a company years ago, and we had probably 10 women. They were the cohort, and they were using a product I had no experience with, which was great, right? Because then I couldn't really bring any bias to the discussion. But we brought them along from early discovery all the way through. We'd have dinners with them. We'd bring them into the office, have dinners, have discussions. We always told them, tell us our baby's ugly if it's ugly, right? That's what we need you to do, is be brutally honest with us. All the way through pre-production, where they actually then used the product and provided feedback at the very end. And it was just a nice way where if we ever had a question during a team meeting, we had an avatar for one of for this cohort, and her name was Mary. And so we'd always say, well, what does Mary have to say about this, right? And it was a nice leveler when we had a discussion and had to make a decision on, which way to go on something. And it just forced the team to go back and say, hey, we need to make sure that we're listening to the consumer, the user, and that we're getting it right, and we're not taking our own personal biases into this inappropriately.
Cool. Let's move on to the second topic. There's a lot to unpack there as well, which was about competition, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a very tricky area, because especially if you're in the software field, like competition can like pop up like mushrooms out of nothing, and everybody has a different take, different UI design, maybe better or worse than what you have. I'd like to get a feeling from you of how much time on average, and I know it's an unfair question, but I'd like to understand like a ballpark of how much time a product manager should be looking at competitive products out there.
Yeah, I would say on a very regular basis. So whatever very regular means to your business, in one of the businesses, we would look at it every month, right? So at most, we are 4 weeks out. And what we would look at is a number of things. We would have objective data coming in. So we used NPD. So this is register data. So if you buy a product, it goes through the register. A company, NPD, buys that data and then parses it and then sells the data off. And so we had that for the US. We had GfK data in Europe. And every month we would do a review of that. On top of that, we would do store walks almost on a regular basis. So we'd walk around in our aisle, we'd walk around in peripheral aisles to, hey, is there a new player here? The other thing that we did is I really promoted our product managers working and partnering with their sales leader, because the sales leader is talking to the buyers, right? And that could be digital space, That could be physical space, and they are boots on the ground. They know who the competition is. And usually you'll get some insights and some intel from the buyer. And so then we would meet with them regularly, say, hey, what are you hearing? Is your buyer saying anything? Is there a new player, to your point, coming on board that you're having discussions with? So very regular. Where it really ramped up is when we would be doing product roadmaps. So depending on the industry, you may do a product roadmap every year, a couple times a year. And those were deep dives where you may spend days looking at the competition and really parsing it out and maybe doing some SWOT analysis or whatever technique you're going to look at to really do a deep dive into the competition. But it's got to be regular. This is not kind of a once a year thing. This has to be regular. To your point, hardware, software, services, startups are popping up as disruptors all the time. So you have to be on top of it at all times.
Okay, I hear that. I love the example that you said, like walking around in the store. The equivalent of that would be creating an account at a competitor and just browsing through their features and trying to accomplish a few workflows in there. I'd like to bring back a point that you said about the previous point where you mentioned, well, in the discovery process, you could also talk to mm, p- like potential customers and target customers who chose competitors.
Right.
How would that work? How do you find these people and how do you approach them so that they
Yeah.
don't feel like it's just like a hidden sales technique and you just
Yeah.
want to sneak in under the door?
Yeah, there's firms that do this, right? So you say, hey, this is the kind
Okay.
of consumer I'm looking for. You can take it all the way down to a brand or a product, and it's generally qualitative, right? You're doing kind of focus group type discussions. You're not doing, N of 20, right? Not N of 1,000. So you're just trying to get insights to like, well, why did you choose that product solution over this one? And you can come in anonymous. You don't have to necessarily say I'm with XYZ firm or company. And look, people love talking. And so you can usually get them to open up and just have great, honest discussions. You're not selling them anything. You're just looking for their opinion on something. And people are very opinionated, right? It's just our nature. And so you can get into really great conversations with them. I'll also say that you mentioned walk and talks, and I actually did a walk and talk video some time ago about knowing your customers with a plural S. And this is something that especially PMs need to really understand, is that their first customer may not be the end user. And so from a business side, your first customer could be your manager, and then the next customer could be the executive leadership team or the CFO, and the next one may be the buyer, and then maybe finally the user. And they all may have different requirements, some of them financial, some of them just from a capability standpoint or whatever, to then get that product approved all the way to market so that the user needs to use it, can then purchase it. That is so important because a lot of times people will interchange customer with consumer or customer with user. And a lot of times that's true, but there's other customers downstream that you need to be aware of and take into consideration as you're starting to develop your product solution.
I see. In a B2B setting, when you're selling, when you have larger contract values and the sales team is selling, do you have any experience with like customers who decline and reaching back to them to understand what led them to decide against your product? Is that something that you've come across sales teams or product teams doing actively? And if you can like bring an example, it would be amazing to learn from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's a great question. After doing this 30 plus years, you're going to have failures, right? Where you come into a sales call, right? So usually they're on a regular basis, once a year, twice a year, you'll have a pitch, right? Where you'll come in with your sales partner and you'll say, hey, for next year, here's our portfolio of product that we're offering. And here's the background. That's where consumer work really comes into play, because you get to say, hey, we talked to your customer and they said XYZ, and here's a great solution for that customer. Here's the financials. Look, I've got a lot of product on shelf with the teams and the hard work that they've all done. But there have been times where we've gone in, me personally, on a call and sat in front of a buyer and everything sounded like it went well. And just to find out a day or so later that actually they're going with another group. Sometimes it was because our financials were off, right? They just had a better financial offer. Sometimes they actually had a better product solution. And we have to be humble enough as product people to say, hey, they just came up with a better solution. I had one product that was in a mobile accessories space years ago, and we thought it was awesome, right? We did all the research, everything. And our competition, they just did a better job. Quite frankly, they just out-designed us, out-built us, and we lost the bid. And so it was a good learning experience to come back and say, hey, the next time we go into this, what did we miss? And to make sure we don't repeat that again. It happens. You never bat 1,000 as a product developer or as a product person. And those are just good learning experiences to get better next time.
Okay. The third point that you brought is being the product being disconnected from company or corporate goals. And this for me is a really interesting one, because I and I'm sure I'm in my bubble and I have my own biases, but I thought like OKRs have been around for a while. And what OKRs do is exactly they take a couple of top level company goals and they break it down all the way to the individual in every single team. So in an ideal world, it should not happen that I, as a product manager, am working on something that doesn't connect properly with a company goal. So I've been interested about two things, like, why do we deviate from this ideal world? Because apparently a lot of times we do. And could you also bring us an example of what it looks like when a product manager is working on a product that is detached from a corporate goal, so we can get a feel of that problem?
Yeah. So answer your first one. Surprisingly, a lot of companies don't have, an OKR,
Right.
type process. And so that at the core of it, it comes down to good communication at a leadership level, right? So having been on the, executive leadership team, my job, one of my top jobs to my team is to translate what we're trying to do corporately, right? The strategy, financials, whatever that may be, to my team so they clearly understand what are we trying to do corporately. And then working with the product managers to say, here's your category. This is how your category fits into this strategy. Now, it may be continue on, keep developing. It may be, hey, we need to pivot. There's a new player, there's a new technology, there may be, new consumer trend, whatever it may be. But to clearly understand from a communication standpoint how it fits in. Then once we actually get into the nuts and bolts of a roadmap, from a financial standpoint, there's a fluency that you as a product manager must master. And those are things like, what are hurdle rates, for profitability and revenue and velocity and all of those metrics that other departments, including your finance team, have, right? So as you're developing your product solution, financially, you have to hit certain thresholds before it's going to be acceptable to go forward. So a lot of companies just don't have that in place. Even big, very well established. I've got some clients in my past life that they've been around for a long time. They're awesome. They're very successful, but they don't have that. And sometimes it's that miscommunication, that translation that doesn't happen. An example. So I was working with a client, and there was this product category that was a pet project, started off as a pet project by one of the leaders years before. And it was a cool product, and it kind of morphed into a product line, some line extensions. And it was done for one specific retailer. And over time, they just kept iterating, and you got more and more SKUs and more variations. And what you found is the 80-20 rule was in place, where 80% of the revenue was driven by 20% of the products. But even those products were pretty stale. And the only reason they were on shelf at this retailer was a personal relationship. And if that personal relationship was broken, the buyer left, the salesperson left, that product line was it was a fairly low profit line as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was not a great use of those resources. And so we had a lot of discussions. Hey, what should we do with the resources that we're putting forth on this? And ultimately, we wound that business down with the client, and those resources were redeployed into something that was a lot higher profit. It put the company in a much better technology position. So it can happen, and it can happen at the smallest startups all the way up to billion-dollar plus companies.
Okay. I wanted to tell or just watch a little bit at the audience. Even though I can't see you, I hope I can pierce through the internet. And just say that we approached the section in our webinar where you're more than welcome to throw questions at Chris. I'll put them on the screen and we discuss them together. So feel free to put these questions in the comments. Until I see some questions popping up, I have two more points that I wanted to focus on with you. The fourth problem that you mentioned, it was related to not knowing your numbers deep enough. And you already alluded in the previous point about like a velocity and some other KPIs. So I'd love to understand from you, what do you think are the top KPIs a product manager should be tracking? And feel free to make some distinctions based on like B2C, B2B, tech, non-tech, based on your experience.
Yeah, I'm glad you use KPIs. It's so important. Again, this is kind of the ensuring that your product aligns with corporate, right? So that's a lot of the work I do with my clients. And so KPIs, what I usually start with when I'm in a new role, leadership role, corporately, or if I'm working with a client, is I'll sit down with my peers on the executive team, right? Or if it's a client, I'll sit down with their executive team. And even before I talk product, I'll say, what's important to you, right? Operations, what are your KPIs? Sales, what are your KPIs? Finance, et cetera, et cetera. Then I'll have a broad overview of, okay, this is what's important to the company. If they do OKRs, they're usually written down. So that's a little bit easier, right?
Yeah.
And then at that point, I can sit down with the product team and say, okay, let's make sure that we're aligned, what we're tracking, right? As many CEOs of our businesses, our categories, aligns with not only what, so for instance, if it's the finance team, they're probably going to be looking at a handful of things, right? It's going to be revenue, different levels of profitability, capital usage, cash, those types of metrics, right? And so we'll want to make sure we align from a financial side, not only what they are, but how they're calculated, because you'll be surprised how there's a misalignment where a product team is calculating it one way, finance calculates it another way, both technically correct, but a mismatch. And so it's important to not only know what's important, but how it's important. And so some of the KPIs, to be brief, on a physical product side, it's a few I just mentioned, right? Revenue, profitability. If you're public, then you're on a different cadence. You may be on every 3-month cadence that you'll be tracking. Net promoter score, that could go across any product solution, right? What do your consumers think of it? Your users think of it. If you're in a private equity owned, private equity is going to look at things a little bit different than public. Private equity is going to look at things like EBITDA, right? Profitability. They're going to look at cash usage, and they're going to look at something called a multiple, right? So that's the way they value a company, and every company has a multiple associated with it. And so as you're developing your roadmaps, you may be doing something to help boost the multiple. It's a new technology. It's something that takes your multiple from this level, 5x, because you're a commoditized product, but now you're going to start getting into the digital space, and comparable product companies that trade in that space are at a 10x or a 20x. And so you may be doing that to drive your multiple up. So again, it depends. But the very first thing you need to do as a product manager or leader is start to ask those questions. What's important to the team? What's important corporately? And if you're owned, private equity, what's important to them?
Do you think it's important to have, let's say, a North Star metric, like a single KPI that is the first thing that you look at in breaking down? Because I typically see two approaches, like a big dashboard with a lot of charts, or tracking one big KPI and creating this distinction between like this overarching KPI plus the dashboard. What's your thought or your take on that, of having a North Star for a product manager?
Product. So again, I hate to say it depends, but it depends. So I'll break it down financially. If I'm public, I'm probably looking at revenue, right? A revenue growth number that'll get the street's attention. Profitability is important, but it may be more revenue. If I'm private equity, the North Star may be less on revenue and higher on profit dollars, right? So, and those two may be the North Star when it comes financial. When it comes to consumer satisfaction, right? There may be a thing where we're launching a product and we're really going to hammer home quality or service levels or whatever it may be to get a wedge into that space. We may look at Net Promoter Score, and we may be solely focused on that, assuming all the financials and operational things are met. That may be our metric that we're going to focus on to say this project or this product line or this solution was successful or not.
All right. I have a last point, and this point is about technical people who transfer into a product role. That's something that you mentioned. I'd love to understand what you think are the risks of being too involved and giving solutions to the technical team. And I'd like to understand this from a perspective that I think having some degree of technical knowledge as a product manager also makes it has a lot of positive effects. It makes your life a lot easier, and you know the language that the tech team speaks. So I'd like to explore this thin line where you're still a constructive product manager, but if you cross over, you start to impose yourself on the tech team, and where this line
It's
is.
a great question. And so let me step back. So product management as a role, as a thing, it's a relatively, I'm going to say relatively, newer type position, right? Things like sales and finance, those are a lot more, they're a lot more established.
Yep.
And what we find is that there's no one path to being a product manager. Generally, I've seen product managers come from engineering, sales, operations, design, finance, everywhere, right? So there's all different paths that come in, and they all bring their different perspective. And quite frankly, generalizing, there's no right or wrong path. As you get into a product management role, it's a lot of learning. If you're open-minded and curious and want to learn, then you'll be a successful product manager. From a technical side, I suffered from this. I'll put my hand up and say, hey, I stumbled on this one. My background is industrial design, so I have a bias towards industrial design. And so early in my career, when I was starting to work in product management, I tended to have discussions that weren't telling the team, hey, this is what we're trying to do, and this is why we're doing it. I would get in and say, hey, what if we did it this way? Or what if we did this way? To a certain degree, that's okay as you're brainstorming and having discussions. Where it kind of crosses over the line is when you're giving clear direction and you're actually doing the job of your product development partner. And I see it in design especially, but engineering is probably the one that comes up most, because especially in a very technical industry, software is a great example. I was writing code, and now I'm on the other side, so to speak, putting together a tech doc or product spec doc, and I'm going to get in and I'm going to say, we need to use this tech stack and we need to go after it this way. And that's when it starts to cross over the line, because you may be pretty smart in that area and you may have a background, but the team is in place for a reason, the technical team, because it's their day in and day out job. Let them shine, right? Have great and back and forth discussions. It's great to know the lingo and the technology standpoint, but let them shine. That's what they're there for. And you'll be surprised as you step back and really allow them the space to do that. They'll come up with some amazing product solutions, and that's what they're there for.
I think I can second that with personal experience as well. To some of the discovery calls that I do for Airtime, I invite our developers as well, and when we go into a wrap up afterwards, it's stunning for me. Every time I ask the same question. So, what are your top 3 learnings? So, first of all, one or two top 3 learnings always differ between me and the developers. So that's something I already love, because I thought like, well, obviously these are the top 3 learnings, but apparently not. Somebody else picked up 3 other things. And especially when we're like brainstorming, they know a lot of technical limitation. What can be done by LLM models? How can you tweak them? What can you squeeze out of that? A lot of technical nuances that I'm not familiar with any longer, and I really appreciate that sort of additional knowledge that they can bring to the table.
Yeah, agree. And the wisdom and knowledge of a team will always outpace the smartest product manager, as it should, right? And even me, being from a more technical background, I had teams that would just like, I can't do I couldn't even come close to what they do collectively. They were just amazing. And so I always got a lot of satisfaction as a leader saying, hey, this is what we're trying to do. I don't have the answer. Don't look to me, right? I'll be part of the discussion. And
Yeah.
it's just amazing what they can come back with, because to your point, things move quickly, technologies move quickly, approaches move quickly, even the tools to develop something move quicker than any individual product manager would be able to keep up with. And so that's one that is a real watch for if you're a technical person moving into a product management role, or you're a leader and you're hiring in a technical person to be in a product management role. It's a great opportunity to get ahead of the curve and do some coaching. And so it's a watch for more than anything.
Absolutely. We are almost at the end of our session. If anybody has a question, this is the time to put it in the chat. If not, you can always reach Chris and myself afterwards. In the meantime, Chris, we talked about a lot of things. We talked about the 5 points, the 5 deadly sins, right? Like designing a product for yourself. That was number 1. Number 2 was knowing your competition. Number 3 is connecting the product with the corporate goals. Number 4 was having your KPIs and making sure that you're tracking them. And if I can also highlight that, one of the key learnings for me was not to be myopic about your own department's KPIs, product KPIs, but have an understanding of what are what is the financial team tracking? What are some other teams tracking, and what are the connection points to their KPIs? And your last point was obviously about not taking the developer's job away.
True.
If there are 3 points that you had to pick, 3 points that we remember from our discussion, what 3 points would you say?
Yeah. So 3 points, I would say certainly know your numbers, right? You're generally in a for-profit operation, right? And so act like the mini CEO. 1, it just will help you be successful as a product manager. And 2, as you move up, if your career progresses, that's where you want your career to go in a leadership sense. It's good practice as you get as your career progresses. Number 2 is knowing the competition, the markets, the channels, all of that, and to stay on top of it. Your question, original question is how often? Often. I don't have a number, but certainly, greater than a day, but less than a year, something like that, where you have to stay on top of it. And then I think, as a bonus, I would say product management is a leadership role, right? It's a role where you may not have a lot of direct reports, but you're influencing a cross-functional team that may come from different verticals, different departments. And so I would say there's the technical side of product management, everything we've talked about today, but there's also a leadership standpoint. So I'm a big proponent of servant leadership, being humble, being curious, being open to learn. And that's a huge part of being a successful product manager, is being able to interact with people that you may not have direct authority over. And so you have to have a lot of influence over. And then being open to saying, hey, I don't have the answers, but as a team we'll come together. I'm open to all different viewpoints to come up with the best solution. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to provide something to your end user that they love and are advocates of.
Fantastic. And thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for this short summary. Thanks a lot to the audience for following through our discussion. It was amazing to see that we had people tuning in from Egypt, from Brazil, from the US. It's always so gratifying to see such a reach, and that people are wherever from the globe. People are interested about the same topic in product management. So thanks for that. And I just wanted to wrap up, but you know what? I see a question from Anita, and I'm going to throw it right on the screen. Thanks, Anita, for sharing your question with us. I'm going to give Chris a couple of seconds to read through and then share his thoughts.
Yeah, first of all, great question. Not uncommon. So this is one, maybe if I can tie it back to maybe one of the 5 deadly sins, as you would say. This is knowing how, as part of it, knowing how your, call it, product category fits into the larger picture, right? So, you know, cynicism can come from a product manager that has a vision for something. They're like, oh my gosh, here's an opportunity space that we have to go after. Here's a product solution that we have to develop. One of the best ways to start to mitigate that cynicism is come with an objective viewpoint, right? So everyone has an opinion on everything, right? But if you can start to come with data, hey, I talked to consumers and they said XYZ. We went out and did research and we observed them and we saw XYZ. Here's the financials. Here's the opportunity space. To be a little bit more objective in that, to me, that's just a good flow to get into. And especially if someone's cynical about something, they're skeptical maybe about an idea that you're presenting. Your job, again, as a leader, is to start to get that data, start to gain a coalition of others within the company that say, hey, this is actually a great idea. This is something that'll benefit the company, and it'll ratchet up to something that the company strategically is trying to do. If you just come in with an opinion, not to say that you can't be very convincing, but your life will be a lot easier to try to convince who you're trying to convince if you've done the homework and come with a more objective view.
And if I may double down on one of your points, Chris, especially if you're in a larger company, I think there will be typically a number of stakeholders involved in important product decisions. So even if you have someone who's cynical, you can still find allies and help them shield you first a little bit from this, from the controversies or the internal games that could spiral down.
That's right.
Anita, thanks so much for the question. Let me wrap up. I loved our discussion, Chris. Thanks so much for joining me. There's a lot of food for thought from what you shared about the 5 deadly sins. I want to also thank the audience for being here and following us. The next webinar will be in 2 weeks, and I'm going to focus on fixing bad cultural habits in tech companies. So if you have time, if you're interested in about the topic, come around. I'd love to see you there. I put the link in the chat. And with that, Chris, thanks again. And I hope to see you around. And maybe next time we'll focus on other deadly sins, or not deadly sins, just picking other aspects of your experience to learn from you.
Anytime. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Take care, everyone. Ciao, ciao.
Bye-bye.